All right, thanks. Well, thank you for coming today. My name is Allison Graff, and I am the convener of our diversity committee in the department. And so we wanted to find ways to basically infuse diversity into our curriculum a little bit more, bring it to the forefront. There's a lot of discussion surrounding different diversity topics today. You'll find as you start to look for careers that they may ask you about what experience have you had, and so we want to better prepare our students in that particular way. So one of our main goals is communicating about different diversity projects that are going on, hence our session today. Also, we are going to have a section on the Psych Majors Canvas where we're going to post professional development opportunities, so things you can do to sort of build up your resume, get some experience, get some exposure, open up conversations. And so if there are ideas you have or things you'd like to talk about or see more in your courses, come talk to us because we're a committee. We have 2 student representatives, and so we hope to grow that. So if you're thinking that maybe this is something you would like to get involved in, please reach out, contact me. And we can find ways to get you involved in our committee because student perspectives are really important in terms of shaping these types of initiatives. So real quick, just want to give a shout out to the diversity committee members. And so you can see that we're a ragtag team up here, but we do pretty well come together and talk. And so you'll start seeing more and more of the initiatives that we've been working on. And once again, if there are any ideas or things you'd like to talk about, you can feel free to contact any one of us on the committee. So today we have a whole list of presenters representing both graduate students and undergraduate students in our department. Many of the faculty that they are working with are also present today here. And so the whole goal of this is going to give you a short snippet of the research that they have been a part of, that they've been working on, and keep it going. So you're going to get these nice little hits, no more than 5 minutes. I'm going to ask you actually to hold questions until the end, because the goal is to kind of finish up with about 15 to 20 minutes at the end so that we can mingle and we can have one-on-one type conversations, because sometimes those are a little bit easier for folks who are just kind of getting their feet wet in terms of sharing their research. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We hope to get to this end point here to hear from some of our faculty, but if we are running short on time, we'll reserve that for another time. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and have Kate come up and pass the baton.
Hi, everyone. As a full disclaimer, I was not actually a member of this entire study on ageism, but I did help Dr. Graff with theming and coding the qualitative results. So I do believe that you had a survey as well. But this is just the theming of, I think there were 9 focus groups with students who were traditional aged and also adult learners as well. So the focus groups lasted for about an hour, and they were guided by a list of questions to examine the understanding of ageism and age-related experiences on campus. So what we did to code for the themes was first, of course, we had transcripts of everything that was said. And then first I read over the transcripts and kind of got a sense for what was going on and some comments that they made. And then Dr. Graff and I met and we discussed between us, and then we did settle on some themes. So we settled on 7 main themes that were consistent with the literature and that were also mentioned in the focus group transcripts. So I'm just going to go along these themes that are here up on the screen. So the interactions with peers included age-based assumptions such as avoidance of working with younger or older students. It involved mentions of group work, differences in life experiences that might make it hard for traditional and adult learners to relate to each other, or age-based perceptions such as someone being authoritative or knowledgeable because they're older or inexperienced because they're younger. So an example might be, I tend to gravitate towards older students who seem to have that same point of view of how to approach the work. So that would be older students gravitating toward each other or thinking someone's more knowledgeable because they're older. So for adult learners, the most number of comments was about the perceptions of their own or younger peers' experiences and skills. such as being leaned on for perceived experience. And then for traditional learners, the most comments were about seeking out older partners because of their experience, but mostly being stereotyped as young, reckless, and inexperienced because they're younger. Our second theme was interactions with faculty. So this included different social dynamics, the age of the professor in relation to the age of the students, and then age-based assumptions, for example, perhaps older professors being out of touch. So comments from the adult learners, most of them were critiques about the professor not being prepared for adult learners or being unsympathetic to what's going on in their life or dismissive of their life experience. And for traditional learners, all of the comments were critiques, such as the use of outdated terms or assumptions made about their age group.
I should make a note, this is not just psychology, this is across the campus. And so it wasn't just our students, it was a campus-wide survey.
Yeah.
And adult learners are 25 plus, that's how it's defined nationally. You're gonna get you a little bit different definition where they start anybody 21 and older sort of entering for their first time.
So our third theme was any sort of generational references. So this included any references that the participants might have made. And we did have a question about generational references, like if they were familiar with them. So this included whether they were familiar or even if they mentioned those terms, like Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, before the question. So that included that, and then mentions of the word like kids as referred to traditional age college students, or phrases such as okay boomer, or iGen, like the iGen. I guess, I don't know. I've never used that term. For adult learners, they observed difficulty between different generations of student and faculty, and difficulty relating to younger generations like the Gen Z and Zillennials. And traditional learners, they used the generational terms in such a way that they were making assumptions about older faculty, such as okay boomer, and about their peers. So the fifth theme, or the fourth theme, was really interesting. It was internalized ageism. So this included jokes about one's own age, self-handicapping because they were older or younger, or the perception that one's experiences aren't relatable to the rest of the class. So comments that adult learners made mentioned that they felt like a know-it-all in class because they're older. Some of them referenced nursing homes and being forgetful and slow. So that's that sort of self-handicapping. And then traditional learners mentioned that they kind of had the ability to be wrong, or they don't really need to prove themselves because they're young and they get off easy because of that. So that's self-handicapping, but on the other end of the spectrum. So our theme of identity, how I found this to be is like a lot of the people were just like, we just want to be like everyone else. So comments for identity mentioned like I'm not special because I'm not traditional. I'm just like everyone else. I have the same goals as everyone else. Institutional support. It included mentions of like scheduling classes or available support services, lack of preparation from the institution, or the inflexibility of support. So all of the comments were from adult learners on this theme, and it was mostly about, like I said, the difficulty scheduling courses, extracurriculars, especially involving the support services and student support services. So lastly, barriers to education that were like individual based. So adult learners mentioned their competing responsibilities and how their life limits their ability to complete their assignments, especially with peers. And traditional learners, I think there was one who mentioned that they didn't have the ability to drive themselves. So those are the themes we found, and it was really interesting being a part of this project. Thanks. And then I'll pass it to Sarah and Katie.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Sarah.
And my name is Katie Eisen, and we both work in Dr. Brumback's staff lab, or a developmental autonomic psychophysiology lab with postdoctoral fellow Dr. Kissel. So research in the DAP lab focuses on mechanisms related to alcohol use and abuse in young adults. And so we conduct clinical interviews, surveys, and psychophysiological assessments such as heart rate, blood pressure, and many others. And the purpose of our research is to better understand risk factors and potential targets for reducing harmful health effects through early prevention. And most research is focused on adults who already have an addiction. However, this lab focuses on those who might be developing addictions or being exposed to abuse for the first time in young adulthood.
Okay, so what are we doing for this project? Recently, we began a different project about diversity among research samples. The Research Society in Alcohol and accompanying journal, Alcohol, Clinical and Experimental Research, or ACER, have increasingly incorporated diversity and inclusion into their posted values of programming. A clear example of this work was the formation of the Diversity Committee in 2016. So our lab is currently content analyzing the articles published in ACER from 2010 to 2022, 6 years before and after the formation of this committee. The purpose of this is to assess progress related to the committee's second aim, which is the inclusion of a wider range of diverse populations. So far we have imported 3,292 studies for screening. And Dr. Kissel came up with this project, and she has worked previously on another similar project in the past to determine the diversity of participants in the Psychophysiology Journal. She used software to pull specific articles and screen them and include them in her search.
So this is a snapshot of the screening process found in Covidence. And so Covidence is the software that we're using to screen all of the articles. So Covidence is a service dedicated to improving the production of systematic reviews so that researchers can use a wider range of data and peer-reviewed articles. And our lab has been using this software to review articles from ACER. And so studies were included in our search if they were a primary analysis of data collected from human subjects. And then articles that used animal subjects, large public data sets for secondary data analysis and reviews were all excluded. And so up here, we started out with the 3,000 and then through screening those, narrowed it down to 1,635 and found that 806 of those were irrelevant. So they would contain like animal subjects or review or something like that. And then 829 so far are going to the next portion. So in order to make a decision to keep or exclude an article, 2 people from the DAP lab had to agree and vote yes or no on the same article. If there were 2 different votes, either Dr. Brumback or Dr. Kissel would have to make the ultimate decision on whether the article should be included or not. And then specific demographics include age, race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, socioeconomic status, income, and education.
So of course this is still an ongoing project, so we don't have any results to share, but when we do get those results, they will provide a snapshot of human participants in alcohol research represented in ACER and explore options to further examine potential demographic moderators of processes related to alcohol use. So something I found interesting while doing this project was that there was a lot of abstracts that use tissue samples, especially post-mortem tissue samples and specific genes related to alcohol use and disorders. I do understand the importance of this research, but I never realized how extensive it was, especially well, there's 3,000 studies we screened. But I'm glad that the software makes it simple and easy to screen these abstracts. So for the future, after we screen the remaining ones, our team will compile all the data and fully examine how diverse alcohol research populations really are in this past decade. So instead of viewing abstracts, we will look at the full text studies. See, that's the next step. And so beyond presenting at the Research Society on Alcohol, our goal is to publish this study in the ACER journal itself.
Awesome. Yes. So yeah, it's been really awesome to be a part of this study so far, and I'm excited to see what we find. And we will pass the mic on to Nicole.
Mhm. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Nicole Goldeisen. I'm currently an undergrad assistant researcher for Professor Graff. We're researching caregiving across campus, and specifically how we define caregiving is people who provide routine care, um, routine care like across the board and outside of the norm. So not just like a parent-kid relationship, but rather someone who provides care for needs of other people. Our goal with this research is to help reduce barriers for those who are student caregivers and make sure their voices are heard. Because we don't know a lot about this population, and the only way to gather research about it is to talk to them. So I started a bit late. I started in fall, so August of 2022. And I've seen a lot of eye-opening things in our focus groups. We've had 16 focus groups specifically, and it's really great to be able to have those experiences because we're dealing with a really busy population, and in order for, and yeah, so we really thank them for being able to make time for us. And it was hard sometimes gathering this data because I specifically did the scheduling for our caregivers, and sorry, I'm not very good at presenting. I'm an online student, so this is completely new to me. But yeah, it was hard sometimes gathering this data because like scheduling them when they're really busy, it makes you feel bad for them. And yeah. So yeah, and so if we have trouble like scheduling them for just an hour, like imagine how busy their schedules are. So the big takeaways from our research with these focus groups is that caregiving is hard financially, mentally, and physically. They often don't have time for themselves and barely enough time for coursework because most of them are students. They all echoed a want for more understanding professors and more flexibility for them as caregivers. They wanted support groups, so groups where they could come together and talk to each other so they don't feel so isolated. They also echoed need for financial aid because when you don't have time, for, like when you're so busy, you aren't able to, you have to like, all the pressure's on you, especially when you're providing for a family, and you're not able to take off work. So it's really hard for them financially. So if we could be able to provide for them money wise, that would be really helpful. And a lot of them were working part-time and even full-time. And we hope to provide them with these resources and strive to promote equality, awareness, and understanding. So these are some percentages that I wanted to pull out that I thought were really important for the demographics. The majority of them are grad students employed full-time. So you can imagine how hard it is to be a grad student full-time and caregiving for someone. Over 21% of the US population is in a caregiving role. So in our sample, we found 18%, so just a little bit under the national average. And I'll read this quote from one of the first focus groups that we did, that I think pretty much sums up what it's like to be a caregiver. We wake up to pressure every day. Just opening our eyes immediately, it's not about us. School is supposed to be us. It's very hard for caregivers to wake up and think about us first. That doesn't happen most of the time. And then I wanted to leave off with some added struggles that we've seen for caregivers, which is COVID-19, obviously. A story that I remember from my first focus group is a younger girl, I think she was around 19. She said that she had failed her first class because she couldn't make it to the class because a lot of the people weren't wearing masks, and she cares for her elderly grandparents, and she was too worried to give them the risk of contracting COVID-19 because it could possibly end their lives. And finally, some sacrifices. So some sacrifices that they make as caregivers. They put off leisure, not enough sleep, mental health issues, forgetting to eat, and feeling isolated from others. So these are some things that we want to help them with. And this semester, we are stopping the research, and we are going to try to find the resources to be able to help them. I look forward to doing that. This Casey.
Okay, so hello, everyone. I'm Kaseya. I am a grad student in the IO program, and I've been working on this project with Dr. B and Dr. Graf. And then there's also been some other grad students that worked on it as well. This was our poster we presented at SPISY over the summer. So this study kind of started in 2020. It started before I got here. And then I've been mostly looking at analyzing the data. So it was a mixed method study. So we did some quantitative and some qualitative data. Most of the participants were white females. The study went out, it was a departmental level survey. So it was, I think the requirement was they had taken one psychology class before. Two. One. Just one, yeah. Just one. Okay. Here at NKU. Yeah, it happened here at NKU. They had to have taken one. So this table right here, this is our quantitative data. So this was, people were asked the question like, does this specific identity impact your learning experience? There were 3 categories, yes, no, and then neutral. We got rid of the neutral category and just looked at the yes and the no, just to simplify the analysis. And so this diagonal, which is bolded, that showed the identity salience. But then also something interesting that we found is that there are other places where the identities impacted their learning experience that wasn't, just an identity salience category. So that kind of showed the need for this intersectional research. So people don't just live in it's not just that they're white and just their race affects their learning experience. There's other identities that they have that are also, impacting their experience. And then with our qualitative data, I did a word cloud. So this word cloud over here is how they defined their identities. And then this word cloud over here is the impact that their identity had. So it was kind of, so I had like a word cloud generator software. So it wasn't ideal. There were some things that kind of popped out that were sort of irrelevant, like perception is pretty big, but that didn't really say anything. But we did find some interesting things like this lack of support was really big, lack of focus. And yeah, it was just really interesting to see how the differences of identity impacted the learning experience. FYI, the posters that are being presented today are actually up on the board over here. So if you'd like to look at them closer, I know for next time, on to the issue that we'll work on next time.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Oni. I used to be an undergrad psych major here at NKU, graduated, and now I'm currently also a student in the IO psychology grad program. So similar to Kaseya, well, actually not similar, never mind, scratch that. So this poster that you can see over here was done in our psychometrics class. So this was not necessarily a study, but it was the objective of the class was for us to create a new measure of a construct that already sort of existed in the literature, but that there wasn't enough information out on it that there would already be a scale that existed. So we didn't, when we were looking at what to look into, we realized that there's a lot of literature on like inclusion in the workplace or exclusion in the workplace. There's a lot of literature about like inclusion in terms of diversity, but there wasn't really a lot when it came to inclusion within a work group. So that's how we kind of narrowed down what we wanted to define work group integration as, because in the literature, there's a lot of information on integration in the sense of like immigrant workers integrating into like the US, into like the US society, but there wasn't really a lot of information regarding how a new work group is formed and how people integrate themselves into work groups. So we define workplace integration as the extent to which an individual is happy at work and has a sense of belonging and satisfaction in their professional capacity. So when we're looking into the literature to see what kind of factors would be the subset of this work group integration, we saw a lot of information regarding like feeling a connection to your supervisor, feeling a connection to your group mates, feeling that you're in a psychologically safe space where you can air your opinions, and where if other people state their opinions, that their opinions will be listened to and accepted. So when we were trying to come up with our hypotheses, we did have two hypotheses. The first one was that work group integration would be comprised of 5 dimensions. So the 5 that we decided on were perceived compatibility. So do you feel like you're compatible with your group? And then number 2 was connection to your group leader. Number 3 was communication with your leader and with your group mates. Number 4 was appreciation. So do I feel appreciated when I am in this group? And then we had a 5th one that we decided to split out from appreciation. That was recognition of knowledge, skill, ability, and other characteristics. So it's one thing to be appreciated in a group, for example, oh, it's your birthday, happy birthday, here's your cake, here's your, card and whatnot. But it's a different thing to feel recognized for your skills. For example, I contribute to this team because I am the one who's able to do X, Y, Z. And I have been told that my contributions are appreciated because I can do X, Y, Z. And then our second hypothesis was that work group integration would relate positively to work group inclusion, because there was already multiple skills for work group inclusion. There was one for psychological safety with your leader, psychological safety with your peers, and psychological safety within a work group. And then we threw in another inclusion scale just to be safe. So we had one on perceived group inclusion because we wanted to really get at, it's one thing to say, oh, this group as a whole is integrated. And it's another thing to say, I as an individual believe and perceive that I am integrated into this group. So now, similar to Cassia, we did use our sample size was primarily NKU students. Well, it was all NKU students. And then we did have to toss out a couple, but by the time we were done, we had 302 respondents. A majority were white, ages ranged from 18 to 66. And we also asked our participants how many hours they worked. So they averaged around 19.07 hours. So most of them were part-time. Well, the majority were, part-time. And then we had, it was on SONA, so it was a purely online study. And then what we ran was called an exploratory factor analysis. If you get into grad school, you'll go into this deeper. But in essence, when we read the literature and we saw the kind of items that already existed in surveys and in scales, we kind of looked at those and said, okay, we think this scale should ask questions regarding X, Y, and Z. But it's one thing to think your scale is getting at X, Y, and Z, but it's really when your respondents answer the scales that when you run that exploratory factor analysis, it's gonna be like, well, these questions are kind of going together and these questions are kind of clustered together. So the hope is usually that whatever you've kind of predicted will be the dimensions, you kind of see at least some of them when you run that exploratory factor analysis. So in our case, when we ran it, we had 5 dimensions that we hypothesized would make up work group integration. And by the time we ran that exploratory factor analysis, we came up with 4 factors. So 4 out of 5, not too bad. And then we had to relabel what our factors were, depending on which questions the analysis said that people were answering these questions similarly. So we ended up with factor 1, work group acceptance. We ended up with factor 2, supervisor acceptance, which kind of tied into the connection to leader that we hypothesized. There was work group relevance, which we felt kind of went with that perceived, inclusion. And then we had work group recognition. So some examples of work group acceptance were things like, I feel appreciated by my coworkers. An example of the supervisor acceptance would be, my manager makes me feel like I belong. An example of work group relevance is, my abilities meet the needs of my group. And then an example of work group recognition is, my coworkers tell me they appreciate my work ethic. And then lots of numbers, we won't get into that today, but in essence, we did find partial support for our first hypothesis, which was that work group integration would be comprised of those 5 dimensions that I mentioned earlier on. And then we did find support for hypothesis 2A to 2D. We do have to note that this survey was kind of limited because most of the respondents were college students, and the roles, the responsibilities, and the tasks that college students are doing can sometimes differ very greatly from those of people who've been in the role for multiple years, or people who are a lot further along in their career. And then this is the beautiful thing about research. You get to the end and you're like, we should have asked this question. And it seems so obvious at the end, but we did not ask anyone if they were in a hybrid format, or if they were in an in-person format, or if the number of times they went to work had been affected by COVID-19, which looking back now, we probably should have. But it's one thing to consider that, you might feel that you're not as integrated into your work group simply because you only see your work group once every 2 weeks. So it might not have to do with you feeling excluded from your work group per se, but it might just be a case where you're I don't really spend that much time with them. Most of the time I'm doing work on my own. And then we also didn't really get into how the differences in work formats can affect your perceptions of being integrated into your work group, and then how this can also affect your interactions with your coworkers, your supervisors, and the work group as a whole. But we do believe that, this was a great initial effort. We were just happy that we found something significant in this study. And then we also hope that because we've kind of started this talk about work group integration and as a separate entity from workplace inclusion, we're hoping that this will promote more worker health and well-being and strengthen organizational effectiveness. So yeah, thank you.
Let's go out to the Be so talented. Amazing. You do anything. Yes. Yeah. 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 She yes.